They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from the people you love the most, but I never imagined that wound would come from my own daughter. I've built a life, sacrificed, and carried responsibilities that she could never even comprehend, and yet the day came when she turned her back on me in a way so brutal, so humiliating, that I still feel the sting like it happened yesterday. If you think your family could never betray you, you might want to think again. And before we dive into this story, don't forget to subscribe for more stories just like this, because trust me, you'll want to hear how this one ends. I was always the kind of father who believed in providing, in protecting, in giving more than I received. I worked endless hours, building a business from scratch, pulling our family up from almost nothing into a life of comfort. Every penny I made, every deal I signed, every sacrifice I swallowed, it was for them. My daughter was the apple of my eye. I spoiled her more than I should have, I'll admit that, but what father doesn't when he sees his little girl smile? I paid for the best schools, supported her dreams, gave her freedom that I never had. I wanted her to feel loved, to never doubt that I would be there no matter what. So imagine my pride when she introduced me to her fiancé. He was charming at first glance, confident in a way that made you think he had everything figured out. He shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye, and spoke about ambition and family values. I wanted to believe he was genuine. I wanted to believe he'd take care of her the way I had. But sometimes a mask can fool even the most watchful parent, and sometimes you don't realize you're feeding a snake until it's already coiled around your neck. It started with small things. She would cancel family dinners because he wanted her attention. She would defend his opinions even when they clashed with mine. I brushed it off as natural. After all, she was building her own life, and maybe I needed to step back. But then he started to involve himself in my business conversations, giving unsolicited advice, questioning decisions I had made long before he came into the picture. I saw arrogance creeping in, but I stayed silent because my daughter looked at him like he hung the stars in the sky. The night of the party is one I'll never forget. It was meant to be a celebration, years of hard work had paid off, and I wanted to share that success with family, friends, and colleagues. The room was filled with people who had watched me climb from nothing, people who respected my journey. The champagne flowed, the laughter was loud, and I stood there thinking this was one of those rare moments where life actually feels good. And then, in the middle of that joy, my daughter and her fiancé approached me with expressions I couldn't quite read. At first, I thought they were going to congratulate me, maybe even announce something of their own. But the conversation twisted so fast I barely had time to catch my breath. He started accusing me of being controlling, of holding on to wealth that should be shared. She chimed in, parroting his words, telling me that I didn't respect her independence, that I was suffocating her future. The crowd around us grew quiet. I felt every pair of eyes on me as confusion and disbelief churned in my chest. And before I could respond, before I could even process the words spilling from her mouth, she raised her hand and struck me across the face. The sound echoed through the hall. My own daughter, my pride, my joy, had slapped me in front of everyone. My cheek burned, but the fire in my chest was worse. The humiliation was instant. Gasps filled the room, whispers spread like wildfire, and I stood frozen, staring at the girl I thought I knew. My daughter. My blood. And she looked at me not with regret, not with love, but with cold defiance. I wanted to believe it was a moment of anger, a mistake. But then he put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close like a trophy, and smirked. That was when I realized this wasn't an outburst, it was a plan. A carefully calculated spectacle meant to break me in front of everyone I knew. They wanted to show power, to strip me of dignity, and in that single act they did more damage than any enemy ever could. The days that followed were darker than I can explain. My reputation took a hit, the story spread fast, twisted into exaggerated gossip. People whispered that maybe I deserved it, that maybe I was too controlling or selfish. My own daughter avoided me, siding with him every time. And then came the final blow. They cornered me with legal threats, emotional manipulation, and relentless pressure. They said if I didn't transfer millions worth of property into her name, they would drag me through public scandals that would destroy the rest of my career and legacy. I wish I could tell you I stood strong, that I refused, but the truth is, when it comes to your children, you're not always rational. I gave in. I signed papers with shaking hands, transferring what I had worked my entire life to build into her possession. It felt like I was cutting out pieces of myself and handing them over. They walked away triumphant, while I was left hollow, stripped not just of wealth, but of trust, pride, and the love I thought was unbreakable. But if there's one thing about being betrayed so deeply, it's that you eventually reach a point where the pain turns into something else. Something sharper. Something stronger. That night, staring at the empty silence of my home, I realized this wasn't the end. No, this was the beginning of a different kind of story, the kind where betrayal sparks something far more dangerous than they ever anticipated. That I remember waking up the next morning after that humiliating night with the sound of my phone buzzing non-stop. Relatives, friends, and even business acquaintances had all seen the video of my own daughter slapping me in front of a crowded room, and the humiliation spread like wildfire. I scrolled through the endless messages, some filled with pity, some with mockery, and others simply asking how I could allow my own daughter to treat me that way. The truth was, I didn't even know how to answer them, because I was still trying to process the fact that the little girl I had raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for, had treated me like nothing more than an obstacle in her path. My heart wasn't just broken, it felt like it had been crushed beneath the weight of betrayal. That same day, she and her fiancé showed up at my house. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened. Instead, she came with legal documents already drawn up, demanding that I sign over several properties that I had worked my entire life to build. She spoke with a coldness I had never seen before, as though I was no longer her father but simply a barrier between her and the life of luxury she thought she deserved. Her fiancé, standing tall beside her, smirked as though he had already won, as if my defeat was inevitable. That I tried to reason with her, tried to remind her of the nights I stayed awake when she was sick, the school fees I paid when times were tough, the way I always stood by her side no matter what. But she didn't want to hear any of it. She was convinced that she deserved everything I had, and she wouldn't stop until it was hers. For days I refused to sign, holding on to what little pride I had left. But then came the threats. She told me if I didn't comply, she would drag my name through the mud, tell everyone I had been an abusive father. That I withheld what was rightfully hers. The thought of losing my reputation, my business relationships, and even the respect of the few people who still stood by me after the slap, was too much to bear. The manipulation worked, and with a trembling hand, I signed over the documents that handed her millions worth of property. Watching her walk away with that triumphant look on her face, I felt like my soul had been ripped out. The humiliation wasn't just in losing the properties, it was in realizing that I had been reduced to nothing more than a stepping stone for the very people I had once welcomed with open arms. My daughter, my flesh and blood, saw me as an inconvenience to be silenced and removed. Her fiancé, who had never worked a single honest day in his life, gloated in my face like a predator watching his prey fall. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a public execution of my dignity, and I had been forced to play along. But as broken as I felt, a small ember of anger began to burn inside me. Every insult, every mocking glance, every ounce of disrespect they had thrown my way started fueling something deeper. They thought I was defeated, they thought they had won, but what they didn't know was that years of running a successful business had taught me more about patience, strategy, and revenge than they could ever comprehend. I had built everything I had from the ground up, and I had faced ruthless competitors before. If I could outsmart them, I could outsmart my own daughter and her greedy fiancé. I knew that if I wanted to take back my dignity, I couldn't confront them directly. They were too arrogant to listen, too sure of their victory to consider anything else. Instead, I would have to let them dig their own graves. And believe me, I was going to hand them the shovel with a smile. At first, I let them bask in their so-called victory. They flaunted their newfound wealth all over town, throwing lavish parties in the same houses I had worked so hard to acquire, inviting over people who used to respect me, just to show off that they were now in control. My daughter would post photos of herself draped in luxury, while her fiancé posed beside expensive cars he hadn't earned. But what they didn't realize was that greed always comes with blindness, and arrogance always leads to mistakes. And I was patiently waiting for the moment when their hunger for more would expose them. I started gathering information quietly. I pulled strings with the few loyal friends I still had, keeping tabs on every reckless decision they made. I discovered that her fiancé had already started gambling away some of the money, drowning himself in debt, and making enemies with dangerous people. I learned that my daughter was fighting with him behind closed doors, frustrated that the luxury lifestyle she dreamed of wasn't as stable as she thought. The cracks were already forming, and all I had to do was wait for them to widen. And let me tell you this, waiting became my greatest weapon. Because while they believed I was broken, I was sharpening every tool I had to reclaim not just my wealth, but my pride, my reputation, and my life. When I thought the worst had already passed, the real storm hit me with full force. The property transfer wasn't enough for my daughter and her fiancé. Once they realized I had given in under pressure, they started treating me like a defeated man, someone they could walk over without consequence. They paraded around in expensive clothes, bought luxury cars, and boasted about the mansion as if they had built it with their own hard work. Every time I saw them, it felt like another knife stabbing into my chest, because not only had I lost my dignity at that party, I had also handed over the very legacy I had spent decades building. And do you know what stung the most? My daughter didn't even bother pretending anymore. She acted as if I was a burden, someone irrelevant, and she made sure her fiancé joined in on humiliating me whenever they could. I remember one night sitting at the dinner table when she walked in with her fiancé and laughed right in front of me. She said, "Dad, you should really learn when to retire. Old men like you don't belong in this world anymore. You should just sit quietly and let us take care of things." Those words broke me in ways I can't even describe. I wasn't just disrespected as a father, I was erased as a man who had worked day and night to provide for her. She forgot the sacrifices I made, the nights I stayed awake to make sure she had the education, comfort, and opportunities she wanted. And now, I was nothing but a stepping stone she used to get ahead, but I'm not the kind of man who stays down forever. I knew I had to find a way to take back not only what was stolen from me, but also my pride. That night, I made myself a promise: they would regret ever turning against me. Revenge wasn't just a fantasy anymore, it became my mission. The same patience that built my empire would now fuel my comeback. I started quietly gathering information. I contacted old business partners, lawyers, and accountants who still respected me. Slowly, I discovered what my daughter and her fiancé were really doing with the wealth I had transferred. They weren't investing it wisely, they were wasting it recklessly, drowning in parties, gambling, and shady deals. The mansion was just a showcase, while behind the scenes they were building mountains of debt. The very arrogance that made them slap me in public was now leading them straight into their own downfall, and I decided I would be the one to accelerate it. I acted as though I was broken, silent, and powerless, but in the background I was setting everything into motion. I learned that her fiancé was trying to start a new company using my old contacts, convincing people that he was the brains behind the fortune. What he didn't know was that many of those same people were still loyal to me. I reached out quietly and explained everything: how he manipulated his way into my family and stole my daughter's loyalty, how he coerced me into signing over millions, and how he mocked me afterward. One by one, those contacts started pulling away from him. His deals began to fall apart like a house of cards, and every time he tried to fix it, he dug himself deeper into failure, and my daughter, who had once been the pride of my life, began to taste the bitter fruit of her choices. She had tied her future to a man who wasn't just manipulative but also careless. Their lavish lifestyle became a prison. Creditors came knocking, and whispers began spreading among the same social circles where she once mocked me. People no longer saw her as a clever, ambitious woman, they saw her as greedy, entitled, and reckless. Her humiliation grew quietly at first, but I knew it was only the beginning. Still, I didn't make my move too quickly. I wanted the timing to be perfect. Revenge is not about speed, it's about precision. I waited until the cracks in their world grew so wide that they couldn't hide them anymore. Then, with the help of my lawyers, I began challenging the property transfer. I had been pressured and humiliated into signing those papers in front of witnesses. That party, the slap, the manipulation, it all became evidence in my favor. And while they laughed thinking they had destroyed me, I was already laying the groundwork to rise back stronger than before. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice. It was about making sure my daughter understood the weight of betrayal and that no one, not even her arrogant fiancé, could take from me what I had earned with my own sweat and blood. For too long, they had seen me as weak, but soon, very soon, they would see what happens when a man they underestimated decides to strike back. When I decided enough was enough, I knew I had to be strategic. My daughter and her fiancé thought they had already won the battle when they forced me to sign over those millions in property, but what they didn't know was that I wasn't as helpless as they believed. I had spent years building everything from scratch, and I wasn't about to let manipulation and betrayal take away my dignity. So while they celebrated their victory, I quietly began preparing my own. I reached out to a trusted lawyer, one who had stood by me through the years, and together we went through every contract, every transfer, and every shady signature they had pushed me into. Turns out, the way they had cornered me into signing, in public and under duress, could easily be challenged in court. What they thought was their win was actually their biggest mistake. While the legal work was underway, I stayed calm on the outside. I let them flaunt the new lifestyle they had built off my money. They posted pictures online, throwing parties, showing off luxury cars, acting like the king and queen of the world. My daughter, who once came to me for advice on every small decision in life, now barely acknowledged my existence, as if erasing me somehow made her more powerful. Each time I saw those pictures, my heart ached, but I also knew I had to keep my emotions in check. Revenge, when done right, is patient. It doesn't explode immediately, it waits for the right time to strike. Finally, the day of court came. I walked into that courtroom not as a defeated man but as someone who had been pushed to his limits and was ready to reclaim what was rightfully his. My daughter and her fiancé sat across from me, smug expressions plastered on their faces. They thought this was just another formality, another chance to laugh at the old man, who couldn't stand up for himself. But the moment my lawyer laid out the evidence, how the signatures had been obtained through public humiliation, manipulation, and coercion, their smiles began to fade. The judge didn't need much convincing. It was clear I had been pressured into handing over everything. Within minutes, the transfers were declared void, and all of the property, the millions of dollars they had stolen through deception, was restored back to my name. The silence in the courtroom was so sweet that I can still hear it echoing in my memory. But I wasn't finished. As much as reclaiming my wealth mattered, what truly mattered was teaching them the lesson they so desperately needed. You see, they had not only betrayed me financially but also emotionally, trying to destroy my name in front of people I once respected. So instead of quietly walking away with my assets, I made sure the story of what they had done came out. Every lie, every manipulation, every time they had mocked me, I let the world know. Suddenly, the same social circle where they had once flaunted their fake power turned against them. Invitations stopped, their so-called friends disappeared, and the respect they once craved turned into shame and whispers. My daughter, who slapped me in public to humiliate me, now couldn't show her face without people reminding her of the disgrace she had caused. I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt to do this to my own child, but she had crossed a line that no parent should ever have to endure. Respect is the foundation of family, and when she chose to destroy mine, she destroyed her own future as well. I gave her a chance to apologize, to make things right, but she doubled down, and that was her downfall. Her fiancé, seeing the empire crumble, left her not long after. Without the wealth and the status, he had no reason to stay. And just like that, the two people who once thought they had conquered me were left with nothing but each other's betrayal. As for me, I didn't just take back what was mine, I used it as a chance to rebuild stronger than before. I surrounded myself with people who actually respected me, people who valued loyalty over greed. And slowly, the bitterness in my heart began to fade. The pain of being betrayed by my own blood will never fully disappear, but the satisfaction of knowing I stood up for myself, that I didn't let them win, will always be my comfort. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying the other person completely, it's about reclaiming your power, your dignity, and showing the world that no matter who tries to break you, you will rise again. So if you're listening to this and you've ever felt betrayed, mocked, or humiliated by someone you love, let my story be your reminder, you are stronger than you think. The people who try to tear you down will eventually face the consequences of their actions. And when the time comes, you'll rise from the ashes not as a victim, but as someone who refused to be defeated. And with that, I want to thank you for listening to my story. If you want more stories like this, full of betrayal, revenge, and powerful comebacks, make sure you subscribe, because this is only the beginning. That if you found this story powerful, emotional, and worth the listen, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and share it with someone who might need the reminder that betrayal can be turned into strength. This is Iron Revenge, and there are more stories just like this one coming your way. Stick with us, because the next story might just be the one that reminds you how strong you really are.